Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on the final 2 volumes of Neon Genesis Evangelion's manga. It's kind of crazy. We were talking in the Discord a few days ago about how it's kind of surreal to be at the end of Neon Genesis for a while. I always get sad whenever a series is ending, and we still have the recap next week to kind of celebrate the series and talk about it. I put a thing out on Patreon asking that fellow patrons if they had anything they wanted me to talk about in the recap. So if you are a patron over on Patreon and you want to answer that post and ask any questions that you want or anything for me to cover, I am going to only be doing Patreon ones because that's a perk of being a patron. But if you pay $1, you get to answer that post, and you also get to be part of the Discord to talk even more about Neon Genesis even after we're done with the series, because I do still feel like I want to go back and talk with y'all in the Discord about the series as it goes on. And then as I watch other series and things start popping up that are similar to Neon Genesis, I definitely want to bring those up in the Discord too on the channel and be like, hey, look at this. And so, because I feel like Neon Genesis is very much going to shape the way that I view other anime, whether I realize it or not from here on in. So that's pretty awesome, right? So I am excited next week to talk about the recap. I'm going to be doing character tiers. I've already had requests to do like ship tiers, parent tiers, lots of tiers, and literal tiers. And to talk about the episode ranking, to talk about the differences between the rebuilds, the manga, and the anime now that we're coming to a close with each of those mediums. And to answer patron questions about the series as a whole, and kind of just be a celebration of the series. I think that would be a lot of fun. Like, I'm not anticipating it being 4 to 5 hours long. No, but I think it'll be nice to sit down and talk for a nice extended period of time about the themes, about the things that were really, really pertinent that I liked most about the series, surprises, things like that. Kind of like what I do with Attack on Titan when I do like a big recap. And then to honor our fallen, because we've had quite a few deaths in this series. And that may, extend into these next 2 volumes. As of right now, we are at End of Evangelion. We are almost to the part where Asuka is versing the Genesis, the Eva series, and I'm very curious to see how Sadamoto is going to end this manga. I'm really curious, because the rebuilds handle it one way, the anime handles it one way, and so I'm like, okay, Sadamoto, you're kind of in that middle ground. What we gonna do? So I'm very, very curious to see how they ended up and what ends up happening. So far, I've really liked the manga a lot. I like Sadamoto's vision of it. I like his voice. He has changed characters in interesting ways, and I like the consistency of it. I think we'll talk in the thing next week, but I think that's been my biggest thing that drives me, is that everything's very consistent. It makes sense. Even stuff that may seem quite deliberate, it all connects very well. And I like that about his storytelling. Yay. But yeah, we only have 2 volumes to go in this one, just 13 and 14. But if it's dealing with End of Evangelion content, there's probably going to be a lot to talk about. So with that being said, I'm really excited. As far as comments go, I don't have a whole lot of comments. Most of them are things that I feel like I've touched base in the discussion so far. But I do really like the idea of it being apples and oranges. I think several people have talked about how the characters are done in the manga versus the anime rebuilds. And I like the idea, I think Christopher Peterson noted it, that the manga is kind of this interesting in-between where it's got influences from the anime, clearly, but it varies it just a little bit, and you can almost see the shades of where it ends up going in terms of the rebuild. So I understand why you all originally wanted me to watch and read this before the rebuilds. That makes a lot of sense, but I am happy that I stuck with this last, because now you can see where the rebuilds drew influence, and it's kind of a nice little afterthought with that. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So yeah, so I'm ready. It feels festive because this cover of this volume set is Shinji in the snow. Seems quite festive and thematic. But we're not going to waste any more time. I'm really excited, y'all, to dive into these last 2 volumes and just see what we get. So I hope you all are ready, but let's not waste any more time. We are going to start Neon Genesis Evangelion, volumes 13 and 14, the final 2 volumes of the manga, here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Oh. That was a really good ending. It's so funny because, yeah, now that I've seen the rebuilds, You could see the influence. You could see where Anno looked at Sadamoto's work as it came out. And the thing of it is, when did this come out? This at the very end, like when did this last volume come out? Did it come out before Thrice Upon time or around the same time? It came out in 2012, 2014. So yeah, first printing, well, it says first printing was June 2016 for that. So it came out originally in 2012. So it came out, you can definitely see the Thrice Upon time took from this. And what I kind of like about this is that Mari came from the manga. How weird. Or, well, here maybe not, because the first rebuild that had Mari in it, would have came out around the time that she was introduced into the manga, right? And you all can comment down below to confirm that. Either way, I actually really like the ending of this manga a lot. I'm here for it. I actually like it quite a bit for a number of reasons. But what I'm impressed by in this, and as we go through this volume and talk about it, there's like little changes that, what I'm really impressed about is that I think Sadamoto had a really hard feat to maintain and tackle, because when we were getting into volume 10 and 11 and 12 last week, I was really going, okay, we're going to do End of Evangelion. End of Evangelion is such a trip, and it works so well because the way that Shinji is and the way that all the events happen, they tie perfectly into the anime and what it's set up like tonally and atmospherically and with the story and the characters. Like it all fits really well. But Sadamoto has made this quite different than the anime series. So when we got to the end of volume 12, I was like, okay, we're getting into End of Evangelion. How are we going to get into the really weird, bizarre stuff and make it work? And that's going to be really hard, right? To make it work and be succinct and match up and have like a definitive conclusion. And Sadamoto does it. Sadamoto made it work. And it all fit together. Now, Christopher Peterson was talking about in their comment last week, and I didn't bring it up before we started, but I definitely understand that there could be people that don't like the manga and how it ends, because it is very much like, here's what happens. And in the manga, like Christopher Peterson was talking, saying that they kind of like, that they prefer like the anime and the rebuilds more because there's a lot more left to audience interpretation. Here, Sadamoto does draw a more definitive, objective line of what's happening and explains things a bit more concretely, and there's not as much left to the abstract as there are in the anime and the rebuilds. It's very much like there's still abstract imagery, like all the imagery from the End of Evangelion parts is still beautifully drawn and very much like just this kind of surreal quality, but the thematic stuff is not quite as open to interpretation as it is in the anime and the rebuilds. And I fully understand that. I can understand why somebody would not like the manga, because they're like, no, as a viewer, I like having it more ambiguous and I like being able to draw my own conclusions and I don't want it spelled out for me. So I can definitely, and we'll talk about this next week in the recap as far as differences between the different mediums go. If you were saying that you didn't like the manga because it gives too much of a clear-cut ending and resolution, no, I get that. I do. I get it. I appreciate what Sadamoto does in terms of making this his own, but also finding a way to end it in a way that stays consistent to what the story's been like overall. And again, we'll talk about it next week when we do apples and oranges to lemons between all of them. But yeah, we'll talk about this. But yeah, man, what a hard task to take Anno's vision and somehow make it your own while still making it recognizable to the audience reading, and doing this manga for 20 years, you know, almost, and somehow making it all in succinctly. Kudos to Sadamoto, because that's not hard. That's not easy. That's hard, right? But yeah, let's go through this. I love the imagery. I'm going to go back through here and take so many screenshots. But yeah, the imagery. One of my favorite things about this entire storyline from End of Evangelion is the way that Asuka and Shinji's relationship is handled. That has been one of my biggest issues in this entire series, has been the handling of Asuka and Shinji's relationship. Because in the anime, it's very, I like the way the anime does it. In End of Evangelion, it's all like, it frustrates me to no end in End of Evangelion, especially the ending, which Sadamoto just chooses to completely go past that. Sadamoto's like, we're not even gonna go there. And bless you, Sadamoto. I was really not looking forward to that beach scene because back in volume 7 through 9, I ranted for a solid 5 minutes about it. I was like, we're gonna have to experience that again, and it's just gonna dig up new emotions of anger. No, Sadamoto was like, don't worry, girl, I got you. Sadamoto was like, we're just gonna skip all that because we don't need it. This version doesn't need it. I'm like, because it's not necessary, yeah. And then to take the ending scene, we could talk about it for Shinji and Asuka. I love it. I love when it sets up, and we'll talk about it when we get to it. But this opening scene, the shot of Asuka and Shinji against the Eva series, I loved that. I freaking loved it. I was like, yes, please. Okay, let's do this. What I love about it is the fact that Shinji came to her rescue. Like Asuka, she was at her limit. She was down to 13 seconds. Her Eva unit could no longer function, and she was out of power and wasn't able to do anything. And then Shinji is a hero. He comes in to save her. Like, he actually is like, no, because that was the cruelest thing about End of Evangelion, was that Shinji finally works up the courage to go and save Asuka and help her. And by the time he makes it to her, she's already been like torn apart by the Eva series. And then that just launches him into a pit of despair, right? And for Shinji's character in that version, it makes sense. But here it's like, okay, Sadamoto, you've built Shinji up to get like this resolve to go help Asuka. He does to the best of his ability. And I love it, but it's great. And I love that Asuka this whole time, she has wanted Shinji to like basically become this hero, this person. It kind of ties back to when it's very curious because how she reacts here sort of ties back to the anime of all things when her and Kaji are talking right before in episode 7, right before they get there. And she's like, well, how's Akari's son? And he's like, oh, well, he's this, this, and this. And Asuka has this image in her head of how she imagined Shinji. And then when she meets him, she realizes that how she has imagined Shinji is not at all how he actually is. And here it's funny because how she imagines him in the anime before they meet is actually how Shinji is here. And giving Shinji the cool line of, sorry, I'm late. It's like, I love she's just like flustered the whole time, like, oh, but she keeps in character. She's like, oh, you come to steal the show? Thanks. And he's like, no, I came because I made a promise to Masato that I would do this. And I love it. He's like, I made a promise to save you. Like, Shinji steps up. It's very shonen, but it fits his character at this point. And I'm like, okay, Shinji's grown up. And then Gendo's still creepy up until this scene with Rei. They swipes and takes him there because he just wants to be with Yui. The whole thing with Ritsuko, though, again, influencing the rebuilds. Here, the same thing happens. And Ritsuko, points the gun at him. But again, if you were to tell me, when we get back with Gendo in a minute, if you were to tell me that you didn't like the manga because we actually get what Gendo tells her when he says he loves her, I get that. Because when he said I loved her in this, I was like, oh, we're not going to even put it to the audience interpretation. We're just going to say it. Oh, okay. And then she didn't do anything. And I was like, well, in the anime, she says liar to him. Like, she calls him a liar. But here she didn't say anything. And so I was like, well, I guess we're going to skip over it. No! She comes back and calls him a liar after she shoots him in the neck. And it's like, and she says the only one you ever loved was Yui. Which is truth. But damn! And then later in the rebuilds, we get her shooting Gendo there. So it seems like, I feel like Anno just read this and was like, yeah, we could do that. Because Anno, I'm sure he read this, and then as he was working on the script for Thrice Upon a Time, was like, yeah, that ending train scene. Yeah, we could tweak that. We can make that work. Okay, cool. I like these ideas, Sadamoto. I'm just going to take this one. I'm going to cherry pick this and cherry pick that, and I'll just make it my own. But, well, and I like that. I like that Anno and Sadamoto, over the years, have influenced one another. They've drawn and given influence to each other for this series. And what it's resulted in is you have now 3 different versions that your audience can decide which one do they like best. Do they like the manga that's Sadamoto's? Do they like the original anime? Do they like the rebuilds? Do they like a combination? Like, it's cool that you get 3 canon versions of the same story to kind of pick whichever one you like best. I don't know any series outside of this that tells the same story 3 times. All 3 times are canon, and all 3 times are different, but they all are distinctly Neon Genesis Evangelion. Like, I don't know any other series that's been able to do that effectively, right? And that's kind of what's incredible about this series, and what's so unique about it is that you have a version for everyone, and it's just it's amazing, right? And you have to praise Sadamoto because his artwork and all of this. I've been in awe of his artwork ever since volume 1, and it just, for him to consistently be this good for nearly 20 years it's astounding. It's beautiful, and I can't imagine spending 20 years working on a piece like this. But yeah, I love when Asuka, he's like, "Are you all right?" And the part where he's standing over her unit, like he's standing over her, like trying to get close to her. It's very intimate, right? It feels like the beach scene where they're intimate on the beach, right? It's what it feels like. And there's kind of those comparisons to when he's straddling her Eva unit. It reminds me of Shinji with Rei straddling him. So there's that parallel, but then it's the parallel of them on the beach, but he's not choking her, he's over her. And it's also a parallel of Shinji over Asuka, like Shinji was over Rei in her apartment when they first met. It's just, there's all these parallels in that one panel. There's all these different parallels going on, and it's so freaking cool. And I love that Asuka's kind of like, she's kind of like flustered because she notices the position too, and she's like, "Well, I'm not all right. No, you're so slow." But then she says, "Next time you're gonna come help, get here faster, you idiot." My biggest beef with Shinji and Asuka and their relationship throughout the anime, and I love the anime so much, but my biggest beef with it is that for Asuka and Shinji, for as much as people ship them, Asuka and Shinji in the anime, it was hard for me to root for them as a couple because Asuka was always pushing away. Like, she always was pushing away. Even when we, the audience, knew that she didn't want to and knew that she had feelings for Shinji, she always pushed him away and had that AT field up, right? And never let him in. And so it was really hard for me to root for a ship like that when it's not mutual and both parties don't realize it's mutual, right? But here, with this and this scene, she's put down her barrier just enough to acknowledge him. And God, I wanted that End of Evangelion. I wanted it so bad. But here she puts it down. She's like, "Get here faster next time, dummy." And it's character growth. I love it. I'm like, yes, cool. And then they have this moment. And for a second, I'm like, am I shipping Shinji with Asuka finally? And then the Eva series wake up. And then everything goes to hell. But the thing of it is that Shinji, he gains this appreciation and compassion and relationship with Asuka in this moment and steps it up a level. And then the Eva series come back. And that's when Shinji gets angrier and more frustrated and desperate to try to save her, right? Because he thinks that something bad's going to happen to her. Because she can't defend herself at this point. She's at 0. I kept wondering why she wasn't defending, and then it hit me. I'm like, oh yeah, she's kind of just a sitting duck there. But man, the scene with Ritsuko and the mom betraying her, it's great. And then Gendo saying, "I loved you," and Rei. I like to think at that point, Rei was like, screw Gendo. I like to think at that point when he shot Asuka, or shot Akagi, she was like, "No, I'm done with you. Nope, not having it." And then I felt this, again, this was so interesting, seeing Shinji and Asuka both sitting there against the Eva series and Shinji trying to protect her as they're trying to rip her apart. And the thing is, Shinji knows she's defenseless, and so he's just struggling to protect her, and he's getting hurt himself. And then he's like, "I don't want anyone else to die." And so instead he asks his mom for more help, and his emotions are just fueling the Eva unit, and he's asking for help, and he's getting filled with despair and fear and anger. And Maya's like, "You're going to sink too much and you won't be able to come back. And all these emotions are going to take control of you." And then it does. And that's what causes the restraints to lift and for the Eva, the second impact to happen again. I like it. I think it thematically fits. It works. It doesn't feel like a leap. It feels exactly in character. I like it. I think it's well done. I have no complaints about it. But then, yeah. And then a lot of this parallels what happens in End of Evangelion, right? That we've seen before. And the Lance of Longinus coming back, the ceremony starting. I feel, on the one hand, I'm glad that Asuka isn't torn apart and dead. That she's, alive during all this. And she ends up becoming part of the whole, instrumentality. But then everything else here mirrors what happened in End of Evangelion. It's very streamlined. Like, in End of Evangelion, I do like, and again, apples and oranges, I could see people not liking this because of how streamlined it is. But End of Evangelion, it's so abstract. And Evangelion, again, Christopher Peterson and I in the comments talked about it. End of Evangelion and the rebuilds kind of have this, why not feel of it? Like, okay. Like, just kind of like, just go with the flow. It's all madness and chaos. We don't need an explanation. Just let it wash over you and happen. This feels like the manga gives you an explanation, which is good. And I like that. But if you're someone that likes that trippy, abstract quality of Neon Genesis and End of Evangelion, I could see how you would be like, well, this seems a little bit more streamlined. And I don't want to say the word mainstream, but it seems a little bit more digestible to a main audience, right? And I could see some people not liking that. But I like it. I think it's good. And explain everything. But Gendo, my dude, I realize that you need to take Adam and like crush it into Rey's body in this sexual symbolism here of Adam and Eve joining. But you didn't have to undress her all the way, did you? I guess you did. What I don't like is that Rey definitely feels like Rey is most certainly violated in this moment because he sticks his hand in there and like brings it down into her womb. Definitely feels like he's violating Rey. So when Rey says no and like shoves him away, it doesn't feel so bad. You don't feel so bad for Gendo. I do think the whole thing with Shinji's palms and having the holes taken out of them, and again, the holes in Shinji's palm mirror where the souls and stuff come out of the Rey Lilith combination later on. It parallels it, right? But poor Shinji, he's just like worn out at this point. And the instrumentality starts. The third impact. And then Gendo's like, take me to Yui. Like, he just uses her to get to his wife. And Rey's like, no. And what I love about it is when Rey says, this is not the hand that I want. I love that because it's like everything Sadamoto has been building up with Rey's character, it suddenly makes sense. Like, she's not just doing it because she realizes how awful Gendo's been to her this whole time and been using her. But I love the idea that she wants Shinji. Shinji is the one person that has showed her unconditional kindness and tried to reach out and communicate with her as a person and not use her. And that's what she wants, not Gendo, who ends up using her for his own means and violating her without consideration. So I love that. I love that she's like, nope. And she ejects him out of her body. And Gendo's like, but why? And she's like, it's wrong. And I'm like, yes, Rey, get it, girl. And she's like, the hand I remember is not yours. I gotta go now. And she's like, okay, peace out. Bye. I gotta go find Shinji. And Gendo's just left to bleed to death, essentially. So yeah, then the third impact starts happening. And Fuyu-chan is like freaking out alongside Alba and the others. And then, yep, the black egg pops up. And then Lilith and Rey like tag team together and do exactly like the transformation in End of Evangelion. Sadamoto's work is just gorgeous. I could praise it all day, and I did during the reaction, but it's just, it's cool seeing him draw everything that happened in End of Evangelion, but with his own style to it. It's really cool. And then, yeah, Ritsuko shoots him and says, liar. The only one you ever loved was her. Oh, I love it. I love it. And then, yep, she passes out too. I do like the cover spread of Hyuga and Alba and Maya and Fuyu-chan where they all just are looking up in awe and shock at everything happening. And then poor Shinji. I like that at this point Shinji's just confused and he's kind of helpless and he doesn't know what to do. And he's like, what's going to happen to everyone and what has happened to everyone? And Shinji just feels like he's lost everyone around him. And then on top of everything else, this giant vision of Rei pops up, enough to freak anyone out in its own. But then he freaks out, and then it starts to, like, the Eva series starts to transform, and Rei's face starts to disfigure, and you see, like, the brains and stuff burst out of it. I would freak out too. I think I would have a panic attack as well. And the crazy thing is that at this point, Shinji, that's enough. We don't need to have Kaoru come in and break Shinji down. Just seeing Rei and his mother look like that is enough to break him, as it would be anybody else, right? We didn't. It's a little bit sad that we don't get Kaoru in this volume, but you know, I feel like Sadamoto's like, we let Kaoru have his storyline, and in this version, Kaoru does not have the same impact that he does in the rebuilds and that he does in the original anime. So it makes sense for him not to be here, right? And honestly, for this version, we get closure with Rei and Shinji seems okay with that closure. Like, he seems okay that she's going and that her life is, that she's still going to be with him, just not in the physical world. And so for Rei and Kaoru to not be there in these volumes, and especially not at the end, like they are in Thrice Upon Time, as much as I like Thrice Upon Time and the ending of them all being there, I do kind of like this version too, because in this manga, Kaoru has a definitive endpoint, Rei has a definitive endpoint, and Shinji moving on without them, he knows they're still in his heart. Kind of like at the actual End of Evangelion, where he senses that Rei and Kaoru, like, they're still with him, just not physically. That's kind of the sense here, but we just don't get that visual confirmation like we do in the original End of Evangelion. So I like it. I think it works fine. I think it's okay. And then, and then Shinji, he becomes the Tree of Life, and then Shinji is asked, what is his wish? And Rei is in his heart and says, what do you wish for? And it makes sense. Shinji doesn't know what's going to happen. And Shinji's like, I'm tired of people suffering. He sees the memories of his mom and being hot and wishing for snow. And then he cuts to, we actually get the aunt and uncle, right? We get the aunt and the uncle and the cousin. And we see Shinji dealing with the fact of his father leaving him. His father, like, Gendo not being able to take it, living with the aunt and uncle. The cousin says that he heard from his mom. And it makes sense because the mom is Yui's sister, and she's mad Yui's dead, and so she's blaming Gendo. And so the kid hears it and tells Shinji. Shinji gets mad because he doesn't want to talk about his mom dying and his parents being talked about badly in that way. And so then Shinji decides that to keep his mom and dad from being talked about, he's going to be a good boy. He's going to just do what people say and just be a bump on a log. And that way, he's like, if I just stay out of sight, out of mind, I won't have to experience any hardships with anybody anymore. So yeah, as we cut to Shinji in the classroom in middle school, and the cousin's like, hey, are you going to come with us to my house? We're going to play video games. Or the one guy, maybe it's not his cousin, but the one guy's there like, you should come over sometime. And he's like, no, thanks, I'm not interested in video games. And that's all Shinji had to say. But then he says, and don't worry about trying so hard to include me. And the one guy gets mad. He's like, oh, well, I'm just trying to be nice. The other guy's like, forget it, leave him alone. He thinks he's cool because he's smart. So yeah, Shinji he pushes people away in this flashback because he pushes people away because he's afraid that if he gets to know them too much, then they're eventually going to betray him or say something that's going to hurt him. And so to avoid being hurt, like he did with his family, he just keeps his distance. So he says, I'll be a good boy and just keep my distance from everybody. But that's not healthy, right? And then you're all alone. And the teacher's like, you've got to finish your essay. You haven't turned anything in. And Shinji just doesn't have any aspiration. He's very apathetic. He's like, and that's kind of the thing that being by himself, that's kind of why it explains why originally he wanted, the world to all be one so people wouldn't suffer. But then once he got that, he was like, wow, it feels just like I felt alone in the classroom. Like nobody's bothering me now because I've drove them all away. But because I've drove them all away, there's no one around me. I'm by myself and it kind of sucks, So it's interesting, right? And then this whole scene with Gendo in the manga is so complicated, right? Because he does things in the manga that are so cruel, and you just look at him and you're like, Gendo, no. But then you have moments like when he's at the graveyard when Shinji's a kid, and he's like crying and like bent over at Yui's grave crying for her, and he just can't be with Shinji. And you're like, God, he's complicated. It's complex. It's messed up. Like, Gendo's just got it. I feel like this version of the manga, I wondered how Gendo was going to end up in this. And it's kind of a mixture of End of Evangelion and the rebuilds. Like, he doesn't get fully redeemed like the rebuilds show him. Like, the rebuilds, like, fully redeem Gendo. The rebuilds, like, make you feel bad for Gendo and really understand him. And you're like, oh, okay, cool, Gendo. And then in the End of Evangelion, it's like, no, he was a villain and he just gets his comeuppance and dies and doesn't get to do anything. And here it's kind of a mix. He still just dies at the end. But then he ends up with Yui in the vision that Shinji has. And here you get a little bit more background to him and an explanation for his actions. So, and then Fuyu-chan's involvement kind of helps explain it too. So, like, yeah, we get all that. And then Shinji, he's put on the ground by Yui. And then there's the day she disappeared. I love Sadamoto drawing. We see Yui and we see Kaoru and Rei and we see Shinji. I like Shinji with this pose here and seeing Asuka and then young Gendo or younger Gendo. I still love that winter shot. That winter image of all of them with the coats. It's going to be my wallpaper. Mm-hmm. And I guess that one is of Toji, now that I look at it. Yeah, he just has the beanie on. I didn't realize Sadamoto can't decide what color Toji's hair is. Is he a blonde? Is he a ginger? Is he a brunette? You decide. Does he color it? But yeah, the whole thing with End of Evangelion, all the imagery. I do like that Shinji, as Shinji's penetrating the third eye coming out of the vagina hole in Lilith's head. I love Shinji's just in bed, like floating through the atmosphere. And he's like, someone come to my side. I love that he like wants somebody to love him and understand him. Like what the basic human emotions that any human would want, right? And then he goes back to Rei. And then it makes sense why originally Shinji's like, everyone I love has gone away. I've lost them. And my father's told me that love is pointless and that you'll never understand people. And he's like, everything I've loved just ends up going away. So Shinji starts getting depressed, which helps explain why he chooses to just destroy everything. And it's like, and then we see all the Reis. The world full of sadness and emptiness and loneliness. Yeah, ugh. And all the images for End of Evangelion, it's pretty disturbing. And we get Asuka seeing Kaji and her saying that you loved me, didn't you? And Shinji's like, it's all my fault everyone died. So I don't want anyone to suffer anymore. And yeah, but then we get the birthday chapter. We have Gendo with Yui. And Gendo is smiling there a little bit, right? She says he was cute when he smiled. I do like the image of Shinji like in the fetal position, like just floating through the galaxy. That's a really good shot there. And then we find out from Fuyu-chan that Yui told Fuyu to watch over Gendo and that she wanted to be in the EVA unit to help save her son and humanity. And Fuyu could never tell Gendo that. That line where he says, I simply didn't tell him. I sneered at him in secret as he suffered. It adds just like a whole other layer to Fuyu-chan, like saying like Fuyu knew that this man he stood next to was suffering losing his wife, but he was so jealous of him because he had Yui's love and not him that he let him suffer without telling him what Yui wanted him to. And they ask Yui if Gendo, if he was able to see Yui again. And then there she is with him. And she's like, you fool, I was beside you the whole time. Like, she doesn't say through Shinji, but she means it, right? And then she's like, you missed the point. Like, our son being born was because we loved each other. And the world was going to be better because he was in it. He'll live now and forever because he's our child. I love the scene though where Gendo, she's like, "Don't you remember how it felt to touch him for the first time?" And his warmth, and we see Yui in one panel, then baby Shinji, then Gendo, and then the baby looking up in the same position that Gendo's in. And I just love that little image of Gendo where he's like looking down at Shinji like he doesn't know what to do with him, and then he puts the finger down and Shinji grabs it. Oh, our wish for him to live. Again, I really like that Sadamoto makes Gendo a very complex character in this, and that there's times where you don't like Gendo and you're just like, what are you doing? But then there are times where you're like, yeah, what are you doing? You know, it's really, really well done. And then Gendo dies, as Ritsuko's been like, turned to LCL. So, And yeah, Sadamoto just drawing Shinji and the sea of life, like all the souls around him. I love the 3 panels back to back. There's the one panel that's a double spread of all the souls and bodies around Shinji. And then the next panel is all of their thoughts and everything that's all like different, various individual thoughts. And there's things ranging from I'm sorry to you're disgusting to I love you to I don't believe you till I'll hold you forever because you're dear to don't go to you ugly bitch to everything. Like it says all these different things that are both positive and negative, and then it's all just one big glump. It's so well done. It's very well executed. And then at that point Shinji sees like the pictures of all his friends and family, and they all start to disappear. And then that's when it's him and Rei, or him and his heart, combined there. And then in the Sea of LCL, he's like, the self has no form. Where one person ends and another begins is unclear. It's a vague world and a fragile world. Which is kind of interesting because the way that Seal described it, they're like, oh, well, this is the vast superior evolution. But even though they considered it the superior evolution that was closer to being like that of a god, it's fragile and vague, right? Like it's hanging on by a thread. And she says that it's the world you hope for and it's one of happiness. But then Shinji realizes like, well, if there's no pain, there's no happiness. If there's no emotion, there can't be happiness, right? You can't have one without the other. And he slowly realizes that. And he's like, no, I did want this, but now that I'm here, that's not what I want. I love when he like pulls her out of him. He's like, there's no one here. So how can there be happiness? It's like being dead. And she's like, well, if you hope for the people to come back, then there's going to be a chance that then there's going to be these walls again. He's like, yeah, I get that. He's like, it may be impossible to understand. He's like, but I have to confirm it for myself. I have to find out with my own body. And I love that the whole idea of him and Rei shaking hands and connecting has been something for the entire series of the manga. It's been that one thread that's been consistent, right? And I love the fact that it's Shinji and Rei's relationship at the end that drives everything back. I'm sad we don't see Kaoru again, but Kaoru didn't fit in this part, right? I feel like if Kaoru had popped up in this story, Shinji would have been like, why are you here? But him and Rei, Sadamoto's always set their relationship to be very specific, and I like that. I like what he does with their relationship. It's really neat. And so I feel like it all culminates to this moment. And I feel like Rei can get proper closure because Shinji is allowed to have these moments with just her, talking about everything and saying, okay, well, I want to go back and try again. He's like, I have to find out what this hand is for, like to reach out to others, to communicate, to connect. He's like, I have to find out why I exist. And I can't do that here in this world where there is hardly any existence, right? And then he remembers what Yui tells him, to protect the happiness of the people in this world. He can't do that if there's no happiness. And then I love the chapter palms. Like, I love that where it's the palms of them being connected. It's great. And so he's like, yeah, people's voices and hands may hurt me again. And I love that montage. It's so good because it's like, yeah, people's hands can hurt. I may hurt people. Join's hands may separate. But all of the pain in this one montage, it's worth it for the other. It's worth it for the connection. It's worth it for the embrace. It's worth it. And then you see Kaoru, you see Asuka, you see Masato, you see Toji, you see his mom. He's like, you see Rei and him and all their moments. He's like, I still want to try and hold their hand again. I love it. I love it. It's just, it is very concrete. It is very self-explanatory there. And I could see people not liking it because it's not so vague for the audience. But I think it makes perfect sense for this story. I like it. And I love them just connecting their hands one more time. And then he bursts out of the eye and everything. And she's like, now we have to part. And I like that Shinji's sad about it. But Rei explains, she's like, I was nobody, but you taught me what it meant to be happy. And I like that Rei gets closure and gets some identity in this last part and some agency where she's like, I'm very happy, even though this is goodbye. And she's like, is the expression on my face the right one? Where I'm okay. And it's like, ah. And then she disappears. Your wish is inside me. And then I'm breaking up and scattering and falling over everything. I love that Rei's soul and spirit becomes the snow that encapsulates it. And then we don't get the beach scene. Nope. We don't get the beach scene. Which makes sense. Asuka was away, and Shinji, it's like time kind of does like what Thrice Upon a Time does. Time kind of reworks itself, and there's no longer the Evas because all of those people are gone. And there's the idea, I'm waiting for you to come back. I love that. I love that as Shinji's floating, there's an explanation saying that, and Yui says, you remembered the promise. All of life has the strength to restore itself and live on. Dreams and reality are intertwined with one another, and the heart determines a person's form. If they imagine who to become, anyone can return to it. So there is it's an acknowledgement that, yeah, all the people could come back. Obviously, I don't know about Masato and Gendo because they, died right before all of this. Instead of becoming LCL, they actually died. But I love that Yui's like, no, I'm going to keep watching over you forever as long as you live. And then it'll be all right. I love this. When you die and are reborn again and again, I'll protect you silently from afar. Which is kind of sad because it suggests that Yui is, like in the anime series, she's going to follow him. But yeah, I like that idea that Shinji may keep being reborn over and over again. It kind of ties to the idea in the rebuilds and stuff that Shinji will keep on going through his life over and over again, which ties to what Kaoru was saying and everything, but that Yui will be watching him from afar. But I like in this that now you see Gendo with Yui. So it gives a little bit of hope to that scenario that Yui's not going to be by herself in the afterlife, that Gendo's going to be there with her, and it's both of his parents together. I like that. Again, kind of tying to the rebuild a little bit, kind of the rebuild and the anime kind of mixed together to make this, which is fun. And then Shinji says goodbye to his mom and dad. So yeah, and so then we cut back to the city, and apparently Shinji is still with his aunt uncle in this version, but he's leaving middle school and he's going to high school, right? So it's like we go back to before he went to Nerve, like it's as if Nerve never happened. He was with his aunt and uncle, and he's on the phone with them, telling him that he's going to call him when he gets to the high school. So he's in a better place with them. And then we see his cousin and the one friend, and his cousin, maybe it was the cousin that was there the whole time, right? So his cousin and his friend there, interesting. And that they kind of see him off and that they've become friends. It's nice. I like it. I like the idea that they've kind of become buddies with him and he's seeing him off, which is really cool. And so we see him get on the train, kind of like Thrice Upon a Time at the station. And then we see that Shinji, even though everything's, gone back to normal and we're seeing Shinji in a world without the Evas, without Nerve and everything, he says he didn't aspire with any future profession or career. And so he never really had any ambition. He was pretty apathetic, so he didn't know what he was living for. And he always felt kind of bad about that. And he's like, the reason I've not had any hope is because I've just not been looking for it. And he kind of realizes that maybe now's the time to start, right? And then we see that the statues of the Eva series are still there in the snow, but the people there call them remnants and ruins. And they can't find an explanation for it. So I was like, oh, that's cool. And so then we cut to them going to out of the train station, going to the academy, right? And we see him getting off the train. And then he grabs someone's hand, and the hand that he grabs, again, going back to the idea of the hand and connecting with others, and it's Asuka. I love it. And it's like they get to meet a second time and try again. And for a brief second, for a brief second, I was shipping them. I was like, look at Shinji and Asuka. And I was like, they actually, kind of like get along here and have like some chemistry. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then you hear, wow, she was cute. And I thought it was Shinji saying it. And then you look over and it's Ida. And it's like, ah! And Ida's like, man, she looks pretty feisty, just my type. Tokyo does have cute girls. And Shinji's like, what? And so he's like, oh, Shinji, you're from the countryside, aren't you? Just like me. And he's like, we're rivals. Let's give it our best shot. And then Shinji kind of smiles. He's like, yeah, let's do our best. And you know what's kind of cool about that? Now I'm like, if you're telling me that we would have a 3-way love triangle between Asuka and Shinji and Ida, I'm down. Because I'm guessing in this world, Toji might not exist at the end of this because he's died. So yeah, if you're telling me that this series is going to go on with Shinji and Ida and Asuka being buddies, I'm all here for it. I love it. And then Shinji's like, I will do my best and I'll find my own path. And it may be rough and winding, but the sun will light the way. And my future holds infinite possibilities. As he has Masato's little cross necklace. I love that. I'm like, yes, good. Good for you, Shinji. I think that's just a nice... I mean, I could see some people being like, oh, it's too streamlined for an ending, but I really like it. It does leave some things ambiguous, like, is Masato alive in this world? Is she not? What about Toji? What about Hikari? If we know Ida's there, so what about Hikari? Will Rei and Kaoru ever show up again, or are they completely gone now? Like, there is some ambiguous elements, but I like how it ends because of what it gives us as the readers. I like it. I like it a lot, actually. But then we get this bonus chapter about Eden and Summer, Mari Makanami. I can't recall if they're suggesting that Mari is Asuka's mom or not in this. I can't recall. I do love, though, that the rebuilds took from this. The idea of Mari being the one that hooked Gendo and Yui up. Only in this, I love that Mari's like, look at that goofy face. I hate her. But no, she didn't. The fact that Mari loved Yui this whole time in this universe, down for it. Although, if we're treating the manga as canon here, that does kind of be like, okay, well, Mari was in love with Yui, but she let her and Gendo get together. That kind of ruins the whole Shinji romance coupling for me, because I'm like, no, the girl you're dating had the hots for your mom. Like, no. And also, if she in this version is actually Asuka's mom, then that kind of ruins it too. But I don't think she's Asuka's mom. I don't think that's what they're getting at. But yeah, I just love Mari in this, that she had a crush on Yui. I support that canon. Hell yeah. See, I wish we could have done that in the rebuilds. That would have been cool. Because Mari always had kind of like, she seemed like she liked Asuka in the rebuilds, which would kind of tie, if she was a lesbian, then that would tie with her and Asuka, her and Yui, that would all tie together. I kind of wish that would have been the case, because then it would have been interesting if Mari had this moment with Shinji being like, I was in love with your mom, like all this, and Shinji had been like, oh, okay. And then they could have become friends at the end. They were platonic besties. I would have been all for that. I actually wish we could have gotten that instead. But yeah, the idea, I love this little side chapter where we see that Mari had a thing for Yui. And seeing how Yui and Gendo met, they met in the lunch line in the cafeteria. And Gendo, he looks so like cold and stern, has this big, super strong jawline, right? And Yui's so like upbeat and optimistic and extroverted. And she's like, oh, hi, hey, friend, we like the same kind of food. And they're like, oh, this is the last plate. And she's like, oh, no. And I love that Gendo like looks at her and is like, and he switches the food with her. This kind gesture, they switched with her and gave her the last one. And then she wanted to sit with him. And he was like, no, I want to be alone. She's like, no. And so, and I like that she's like, I wanted to see what was beyond that grumpy scowl of his. And he finally smiled. And wouldn't you know it, he was really cute. And of course, Mari's like, because she likes Yui, and this is just making it to where she can't be with Yui. And it's so sad. And the one woman saying she's always rough on you, Yui. But it's because she loves her. Ugh. And then her seeing Gendo and just walking past him. So sad. And then, yeah, the whole thing with the lab mice and her, like, trying to help him, like, it's great. And then the mouse landing on her head and everything. Like, it was really, really cute, that whole scenario. And then we find out that she had stolen Yui's glasses to keep them because she liked her. And then Yui, being kind, gives her the glasses to keep and, like, puts her hair in the two pigtails that we see her in the film with. Interesting. And then, yeah. And that's the end. So, I really loved that a lot. That was very touching. I thought that was a great adaptation. If you'd asked me how I thought this manga was going to end, that's not how I thought it was going to end at all. I'm really glad it went through a lot of the same beats as End of Evangelion. That was really cool. I liked that. The animation, the artwork was gorgeous. And again, I really liked Sadamoto's vision throughout all of this. It was just chef's kiss. It was great. So yeah, I'm very curious to know your thoughts about the manga as a whole now that we finished it. I feel like it was a very conclusive, nice wrap up to the manga series. And I'm very excited to go through your questions on Patreon and get ready for the recap, which will be next week. So that's going to be fun, right? I'm very excited to go through it. It's going to be a lot of fun. But in any case, I hope that you all have a wonderful week. I hope you all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, but please stay safe, take care, and yeah, we'll be back next week with the final recap, review, and I guess RIP of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Bye.